Hello and welcome back. Welcome back to History 102 at JMU for the adult degree program. Checking, make sure everything's working. Summer 2025. I'll start recording around 7 in the evening, a little after. Continuing on in our course. I guess we're in week 7 now, only one more week after this. We're going to combine two lectures this evening. The Soviet Afghan War and the Iran Iraq War. And I'll try not to linger too long on any one thing and try to keep things moving. We're going to do these together, sort of like I did the Hello Kitty Cat, just like I did the partition of Palestine and the partition of India, because these wars are fought concurrently. They happen at the same time. These wars run about the entire length of the 1980s. They end right at the maybe a year or two prior to the end of the decade. And I want to talk about these before I talk about the fall of the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Afghan War is going to contribute greatly to the fall of the Soviet Union. So I want to talk about it in a little more detail. And I want to talk about the Iran Iraq War as well before I get to Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev and all of that, because I want to give you some details of these and then get into the bigger picture. So let's talk about these wars in the 1980s, what we know about these, and particularly how they're going to affect things moving forward. So, if we want to put this in the context of the course, the second half, coming out of the First World War, looking at Central Asia, it was Great Britain's darling. They had India, they had the mandate in the Middle East, and there was Afghanistan in the middle, who, if you'll remember, the Third Anglo Afghan War was 1919. So even then, Great Britain was still trying to wrestle Afghanistan into their greater Asian empire. But after the Second World War, they're bankrupt, their industry has been damaged greatly. They cannot afford empire. We've seen what's happened in the Middle East concerning Palestine. We've seen what's happened in South Asia. Let's talk about decolonization in Afghanistan and then Iran and Iraq. What happens when the colonial powers lose control of these regions? Because what we will see in Afghanistan in the 1960s, now this is on the border with Pakistan, the new state born out of the partition of India. This is on their western border. We see in the few cities, particularly Kabul, Kandahar, Western modernism, because there is a government there propped up by the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is funding another one of these buffer states, these satellite states in Afghanistan. So the 60s and the 70s are a time when, in the non mountainous regions, this sort of highway that connects the outer rim of this mountainous region, there are your major towns and cities, and especially where it's going to have the passes into Pakistan. Then you have broad agricultural regions. But up in this mountainous region, if you've ever driven through West Virginia, up, on the highway, that's what Afghanistan is like. It is high mountainous, pockets of people living in isolation that have been practicing a semi nomadic herding lifestyle, herding sheep and goats for millennia. You understand? It is a difficult life way, it is a tribal life way. That's who lives there. And if you'll remember the Opium Wars, one of the main crops that is grown in the agricultural parts is the opium poppy for export for the world's drug markets. To this day, heroin is derived from the opium poppy. Opiates are derived from the opium poppy. I cannot pretend to tell you that I know much about the fall of this socialist government. I do not. So here are some of these specifics spelled out for you. But it seems that the socialist government and a monarch was having a dispute, and the military attempted a coup. And it seems that in all of this political tumult and chaos, someone was reaching out to the West for support. And the Soviets said, absolutely not. We're not going to have anyone interfere in one of our satellite states. So they're going to roll in with their military. And they're going to say, we're going to initiate a military intervention based on the Brezhnev Doctrine. Following Khrushchev, we'll have a Soviet premier named Brezhnev. And Brezhnev, similar to the American domino theory, will match the Americans and say anywhere around the world, if a socialist government is in peril of falling, we will intervene. So, using this Brezhnev doctrine, they begin a Soviet intervention in Afghanistan. Now, remember, they had been a socialist government funded by the Soviets. That was Soviet communism. That was equality. If you'll remember, I believe I mentioned that even in the early and mid 20s, using Lenin's new constitution and new directives, even though he said we'll give some personal autonomy to those Russians living in the Soviet Empire and give them their own SSRs, we're still going to have you live under communism, and we'll try to shame you into no longer wearing your traditional Islamic garb. You are equal, men and women. Women no longer need hide beneath clothing. It doesn't really take, but what we see in Afghanistan, in the cities, is men and women side by side in schools, an Afghan airline with female flight attendants, women in universities, women in workshops, because according to communism, there was equality, the equality of the proletariat, men and women. This is not the traditional life way of the Afghans. They are traditional Islamic tribal peoples. They believed, perhaps much like the Sepoys believed, that the Soviets were forcing cultural and religious change. They saw the Soviets as what the Soviets said they were, atheists, which is an abomination in their eyes. What is a mullah? He is a local leader, not unlike the Mandarin that I mentioned in Asia, a village level head man, decider of things, usually the richest and most successful person in that village. Mullah could look something like that. But let's be fair. I have talked to a lot of veterans from Afghanistan, know a couple of them very well, good friends. Mullahs also look like this. What was Gandhi preaching during his salt march? Do you remember? Avoid alcohol. Don't pay the salt tax. And stop marrying little girls, as is our tradition in this part of the world. Gandhi said, this is something we've got to stop doing. It's not good anymore. We know better. Well, not here. And a lot worse stuff happens too that I'm not going to talk about. You understand? These are tribal people living a life way that we would see as horrible and as going against life, liberty, and property. You understand? But they hate the communists because they are atheists and because they believe they are trying to force a new life way upon them. So they're going to begin rebelling and forming alliances amongst themselves to fight against Soviet occupation. Why did the Soviets want to commit so much of their military to this? They believe that if they can truly hold Afghanistan, that it's so close to the Indian Ocean, maybe by conquering just a little bit further to the shore through Pakistan, then they'd finally get that warm water port on the Indian Ocean, and they'd have this close direct trade route with India and all of the Indian Ocean. And think about what you know about West Virginia. It's packed with natural resources like coal and natural gas. And this is the Cold War. So they want to look for uranium. They want to look for other minerals that's going to feed their industry. So they see Afghanistan as an asset that they could possibly exploit. What about all of these Islamic tribal peoples? I've already told you. These atheists, imperialists are coming in to take over and change our way of life everywhere. It's no longer just a funded government in one or two cities. They've rolled in with their military and they're taking over. So, this is an opportunity to declare a jihad. This is a holy war. This is a blessed conflict against the Soviets. Initially, they're not well organized and they're divided amongst tribal lines, amongst Sunni and Shiite lines, but they're going to get organized. And they're going to get organized through the help of the United States and other outside factions into the Mujahideen, the warriors of God. You understand? And they will begin a, much like we learned about Ho Chi Minh, much like we learned about Mao against Japanese occupation. I didn't teach you about resistance to the Nazis, just not enough time. They're going to form an underground insurgency against the Soviets. How do the Soviets come in? Like I said, there's this main road, this loop around the most mountainous parts, and that they can hold. They'll also fly into Kabul. Kabul and Kandahar being your two main cities. And to give you a little deep dive into history, Kandahar, before it was Kandahar, was Gandhara, and before it was Gandhara, it was Alexandria. It's one of the Alexandrias Alexander the Great founded. This is a crossroads. Many times Afghanistan is known as the graveyard of empires. It's just the center of Asia, and it's impossible to hold. So again, Brezhnev, using the Brezhnev doctrine, says we're going to invade, we're going to intervene. And this is how they go about it. Is this the Soviets' Vietnam? Many in the United States intelligence service are working very hard to make it so. The Soviets are there to keep a socialist regime from falling. There is an insurgency against them, and we are going to fund it. And we, meaning the United States, is going to fund it and supply it. And against overwhelming odds, the Soviets will pull out. Here are just some photos of the armored personnel carriers rolling by, some of the military technology of the Soviets in this period. But truly, this is similar to what we learned about the British. They will be trapped in mountain passes. They will be ambushed by the Mujahideen. They will be able to move in and out of the country into Iran and into Pakistan and get resupplied and then come back in. I remember very well watching footage of this on 2020, the news program with my father in the 80s. How do the Soviets react to this? They have enormous helicopter gunships. And if they believe they have been attacked by a particular village or tribal group, they come in with these gunships and they destroy those villages without mercy, men, women, children, all of them, to try to eradicate the threat to their military operations. How will the Mujahideen survive if their families. You understand? Their children and wives are being blown to bits because of their activity. The United States is going to step in. Yes, we're going to see Jimmy Carter condemn this because this begins in 79. He'll say, we're not going to come to your Olympics in Moscow. There'll be bans on weapon sales and so forth. When Reagan comes in, we're going to see significant CIA training and money begin flowing into Pakistan to go into Afghanistan. By 85, we see an increase in this. He wants to put more and more pressure on the Soviet Union as it's economically falling apart to up the ante, to show them there's no coming back. These Stinger missiles become a primary weapon of the Mujahideen in defeating these helicopters. They are a shoulder mounted, point and click, easy to lock on and fire, and they begin taking over the skies. They begin knocking these helicopters out. They are very effective, and we can send them as many of these as they need. But don't take my word for it. Let's hear from Zbigniew Brzezinski.
U.S. National Security Advisor Brzezinski flew to Pakistan to set about rallying resistance. He wanted to arm the Mujahideen without revealing America's role. On the Afghan border near the Khyber Pass, he urged the soldiers of God to redouble their efforts.
We know of their deep belief in God, and we are confident that their struggle will succeed. That land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
The purpose of coordinating with the Pakistanis will be to make the Soviets bleed for as much and as long.
Yes, what he was going to say there is to make the Soviet Union. Let me just pull it up. The purpose of coordinating with the Pakistanis will be to make the Soviets bleed for as much and as long as possible. It is entirely true that this was a war fought with our gold and their blood. Is this their Vietnam? We certainly tried to make it so. We wanted to make the Soviets bleed as much as possible in this war. This was very much in the minds of the American intelligence in the 80s, revenge for Vietnam, for any support that was given to the Vietnamese against us. We are paying you back. And unfortunately, this video I can't access anymore. It was a great video of the Russian military in action in Afghanistan, but I can't find it anymore. So you get a photo like something like this. 1985. Afghans meeting with Ronald Reagan in the White House. He liked saying things like this: these gentlemen are the moral equivalent of America's founding fathers. He's going to say that about the Contra rebels in Central America as well. He liked to arm and fund groups fighting against our enemies, or who he perceived as America's enemies, and called them freedom fighters. That's how Ronald Reagan liked to frame things. Well, they will win, and they'll go on to be the Taliban in the 1990s. They will indeed. And in fact, their good friend, Osama bin Laden, will hang out with them in the 90s in Afghanistan, because Osama bin Laden is part of the Mujahideen. Osama bin Laden is born to a wealthy Saudi. This father of his became very wealthy in commercial construction, and that's putting it lightly. You understand, he helped build Saudi Arabia. So Osama is one of many, 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 many children. And when this war breaks out, he feels he is called to go fight in this jihad for the Mujahideen, and becomes a leader within the movement because his family has money and they can help fund his venture here. So he has CIA support during the 1980s as a member of the Mujahideen. And in the 1990s, in the early 1990s, during the Gulf War, he will even offer to go to war against Saddam Hussein. But things will change. For him, when his government of Saudi Arabia allowed U.S. military forces to build military bases in Saudi Arabia and to stay there permanently, he saw this as a great sin against Islam, because Saudi Arabia is home to Mecca and Medina, the two holiest sites within Islam. And Osama bin Laden thought this was against the religion in such a profound and profane way that America was now a target for him. A few more photos. The man you see here on the right is Charlie Wilson. He was a congressman from Texas. He is responsible for increasing the amount of aid sent to this conflict over the years that it was fought. He makes this his own pet project. And you can see that the Mujahideen is supported not only by the United States, but by Great Britain, Saudi Arabia, and China. They all seek to make the Soviet Union pay. The Soviets don't lose nearly as many soldiers in the in Afghanistan as the United States lost in Vietnam. They lose an enormous number of equipment and tens of thousands injured. Russian mothers don't like seeing all of their sons coming back injured from Central Asia, especially when their country is economically falling apart. This is very much part of causation, a major part of the causation of the fall of the Soviet Union. Of course, there are around a million Afghans dead. But how can you really count all of the different villages that are destroyed during this? And millions of refugees who are mainly fleeing into Pakistan. Pakistan has the most fear in this because they fear that the Soviet Union is going to keep going and conquer through them to the sea. Do you recognize anyone in the photo on the right? In the 80s, when I was a young lad, this was a very famous magazine cover. The Afghan Girl, a young Afghan refugee. This photograph must have won awards. But the anger and the frustration on her face and her eyes captivated the West. And then, during the last Afghan war with the United States, somebody recognized her. She's still a refugee. And she's a mother. War is still forcing her from her home. And we know the long term effects that when this conflict is over and the Soviets leave, so too does the United States and all of that aid. And we're gone, the Soviets are gone, and we leave Afghanistan to the Afghans. And they conspire against the West. But we're not quite done, no, because we need to talk about what's happening in neighboring Iran and Iraq. All of these countries border each other. What's going on there concurrently throughout the 80s as the Afghans are trying to force out the Soviet Union? Is this the longest 20th century war? Maybe. Soviet Afghan war is about the same length, maybe a little longer. Just don't believe that. You see where it says ethical? That's wrong. Ethnic. Ethnic. War triggered by. I like to do this because if you're just reading the slides, you're not getting the corrections. It's triggered by ethnic, religious, economic, and territorial conflict. Mainly fought on the borders, but this is very much an air war, bombings back and forth. 9 years of warfare, and it puts both societies to total war. That their societies, every member of society is working towards the fighting of the war. It will lead to the Gulf War of 1991, which I alluded to at the end of the last lecture with Osama bin Laden. This war is fought with chemical weapons and biological weapons. Speaking of chemical weapons, did the U.S. use chemical weapons in Vietnam? We used Agent Orange and napalm. Let's learn about this war. My, but there's an awful lot of text on these, isn't it? Long-term effects. First one. Let's talk about the Shatt al Arab waterway. When we look at a map, look, can I find a map? This is Kuwait, okay? The waterway that connects Iraq to the Persian Gulf is extraordinarily narrow. If you'll remember from your learnings about Mesopotamia, hello, kitty cat, the mouth down here, the delta, silts up. So Iraq has a problem maintaining a good, clear, open port to the Persian Gulf. So they have to sort of share waterways with Iran. But Iran doesn't like to play nice with them and allow them access to it. So that is a long-term effect of this war. Another long-term effect or cause of this war. When the British drew this map and said, we're going to call this the Kingdom of Iraq, they didn't take into account that these folks up here consider themselves Kurds, and this is going to spill over into Iran, into other countries. These folks down here consider themselves Shiite Muslims, and these folks here consider themselves Sunni Muslims, okay? And then you have some bleed over in different areas of mix. So some of those Muslims living there might prefer to be ruled by Iran because the Iranian peoples are Shiites. Then you have the ethnic issue where, now this is going to get a little deep, Iraq is mostly Arab, but Iran is mostly Persian. And there has been a centuries long, perhaps millennia long rivalry between Arabs and Persians. The Persian culture is the older culture going into the ancient period, the Bronze Age, you understand? But the Arab culture birthed Islam. So they both have these proofs of being the superior culture, and they have a huge rivalry with one another. What are the more short term causes? Okay, they have a dispute over a waterway, Shiites and Sunnis, Arabs and Persians, the two leaders that come to power, two charismatic leaders. When I tell you to look for elements of fascism moving forward in the class, well, let's look for them here as these two charismatic leaders come to power. Let's see how that affects things and see if that isn't another cause for this war. I think I've explained this pretty well. Iraq, multi-ethnic. How do we rule over a multi-ethnic empire? In 1975, the country of Algiers, which I already talked about Algeria, the country of Algeria, in the city of Algiers, the Algerians helped mediate an agreement that said Iraq can use the Shatt al Arab waterway and that we will have normalized relations. In return for Iraqi recognition of all of this, Iran will stop funding the rebellion of the Kurds. Okay? things seem like they should be getting back to normal. How does Saddam Hussein come to power? Who is Saddam Hussein and how does he come to rule Iraq? Have you ever seen a non white Nazi before? A non white European Nazi? Now you have the Free Arabian Legion, Arab, Middle Eastern, North African volunteers into the German army. The Ba'athist Party is a party that comes to be coming out of the interwar period and out of the Second World War, inspired by the fascism that they witnessed in Europe. It is a pan Arab party, an Islamist pan Arab party. And they, in Iraq and in Syria, will come to power with the motto of unity, liberation, and socialism. We will all come together as Arabs. We will liberate ourselves from our colonial oppressors, and we will come together under socialism as our government. Further, we will all unite against Israel. And we are Sunni. We are consensus Muslims. We are not the Shiite millennial or millenarian sort of Muslims. So they will commit coups in Iraq and in Syria, overthrow the monarchy. Who is Saddam Hussein? Let me make a quick and easy comparison. He is similar to Joseph Stalin in that he came up through the ranks because he was good at killing and kidnapping and things like that. He knew who to keep close and who to eliminate. That was his role in the party. So that in the 68 coup, he will be the vice president. And what does he do? Members of his family, the closest people to him, he will put in key positions in both the party, the government, as well as the military. What will they do? Similar to what we saw in other fascist regimes. They create the state trade union. They build schools and take over education. They create, similar to the Hitler Youth, state sports clubs. You understand? They make the education to promote their own agenda of pan Arab nationalism, a love of order. You understand? How will they pay for all of this? They nationalize oil. What does that mean? The state now owns all of the oil reserves. And from selling oil, the state gets the benefit for what? Education, health, and welfare, socialized medicine, socialized education. They will work with OPEC to raise prices so that they can build their economy and their infrastructure. This is Arab socialism. By 76, Saddam will make himself a general in the army, have his own secret police, and he will pay his soldiers well to keep them happy and loyal. He will imprison and execute those who are not loyal and reward those who are. And his secret police will come to dominate the party and society. So that by 79, he's able to force out the president, make himself the president, the chairman of the Revolutionary Council, the prime minister, and the commander in chief of the armed forces. Anyone who tries to remove him from absolute power, he has found out by his secret police. Remember, he's put all of his family members and closest friends in the highest positions of power. So he's going to begin, like Stalin, his purges, purging the government of anyone he doesn't think he can trust, killing them, sending them to prison forever. You understand? And now it's some of them that they thought were his friends. He's going to get rid of anyone who is absolutely not a yes man. But don't take my word for it.
The new president calls a special meeting of senior Ba'ath Party members, which he records. This is the actual footage of what is one of the most notorious events of Saddam's reign.
People are invited to the Congress without knowing what is on the agenda. It starts with Saddam announcing that something very sad and tragic happened.
He claims he's uncovered a conspiracy against him. He then introduces senior Ba'ath Party member Muhi Abdal Hussein Mashhadi, the man Saddam claims is the plot's ringleader.
You can actually see how frightened he is when he starts telling the story of the conspiracy.
Mashhadani was simply promised his life in exchange for mentioning the names.
Mashhadi starts naming names. His fellow conspirators, he says, are in this very room.
Members of the security services, now under Saddam Hussein's step-brother Barzan Tikriti, take them out.
10 men are removed.
Nobody knows if I'm going to be next or not.
Then another 10.
And you see the faces of these people. They are as white as snow.
Then another 10.
That fear that he evoked from these people, he enjoyed.
Saddam is smoking one of those Cuban cigars that was given to him by his friend, Fidel Castro.
He's very calm, very cool.
Then 10 more.
He sat back, smiled, smoked his cigar, and he was thrilled. He was enjoying the power, and he knew that now he was going to have unrivaled power. Those left, they had one choice, and that is to be loyalist, extreme loyalist, and to pledge their fealty to Saddam Hussein.
You have this ecstasy of the whole hall exploding in long live Saddam, long live the Ba'ath.
In total, 66 alleged traitors are removed. A third are executed by firing squad, including Mashhadi.
The purge of 1979 is a watershed. From now on, Everybody is on notice. You don't antagonize Saddam under any circumstances. Don't even try it. That's 1979. That's when Iraq is becoming a real dictatorship.
In just a couple of hours, Saddam Hussein eliminates any traces of political opposition. He has achieved total power.
Well, let's see if we can't find someone who wants to antagonize Saddam Hussein. I think we'll find someone. Yes, a personality cult. Absolutely. His image is everywhere. He is the great leader. In fact, he is who? He is Nebuchadnezzar, the great Babylonian king of the Old Testament who destroyed Israel. Actually, he destroyed Judah, if I recall. I believe the Assyrians under Sargon II destroyed the kingdom of Israel, and then Nebuchadnezzar came and destroyed Judah. So that is who he is comparing himself to, someone who could destroy a Jewish kingdom. And you must beware, he might be in disguise out visiting the common people. So you best be on your best. What is he, a god? Is he a spirit that walks among you? Oh my. Mm-hmm. Yes, this is Big Brother peering over your shoulder. It is socialism. It is a specific sort of fascist socialism where they do use the revenues from oil sales to modernize things. You understand? And he uses it to build up his army, to build up his military. Yes, from the Soviet Union, because they're arming the Arab states as the United States is arming Israel. However, because Syria and Iraq were part of the French mandate, they still have existing relationships with the French. And the French are selling them a lot of weaponry as well. They have chemical and biological weapons programs and have made quite a bit of them. They do try to make nuclear weapons. However, in 1981, the Israelis send in bombers and blow up all of the stuff that they French had um, sold to them in terms of building a reactor. I think we found our guy who wants to antagonize Saddam, and that's going to be the Ayatollah Khomeini. He is a Shiite cleric, a public religious figure in Iran. And he speaks out in fiery rhetoric publicly against the Shah. The Shah is an ancient term meaning king, uh, going back to the early Persian kingdoms. The emperor of the Persian Empire was the Shah, the king of kings. Well, in the 50s, the United States and the CIA had overthrown a democratic movement in Iran and placed the Shah on the throne and supported him with military and funding and so forth. And he was a Western ally. Well, the Ayatollah says, look, you're ruling through an oppressive secret police force, the Savak. You aren't doing anything for the poor in this country. All the oil that's being sold out of here is just enriching the rich. There's nothing going on to um, help anyone in the country, especially the traditional people. So the Ayatollah is forced to live in exile. after having been arrested on a couple of times, leading violent protests. So he will be in Egypt and then in Paris as the internal crises in Iran continues, as violent revolution begins, and Shiites believing that they would be a martyr to their cause and their religion, began violent revolution. And Khomeini speaks out publicly and says, yes, revolt and martyrdom is part of our practice of Islam. And let's hear it from him himself.
You've had a lot of days starting on the road before dawn. Long rides and weather checks and rechecks. Moments where you messed up.
Ayatollah Khomeini, you seem to have had some success, you and your followers, in changing the government in Tehran. Do you have any feeling for how long it may be before there is an Islamic State in Iran?
It is very close, and very soon we will announce a new government.
Are we talking about days, weeks?
Probably a few days.
From CBS News, Pontchartrain, France. A spontaneous and unrehearsed news interview on Face the Nation with Ayatollah Khomeini, Iranian religious leader and also political opposition leader to the Shah of Iran. His remarks will be translated by his associate, Dr. Ibrahim Yazdi.
You have spoken out against Israel. Now, what would happen if there were another war in the Middle East? Would you put Iran's army, one of the greatest in the world, into action against Israel?
We are against Israel, and we will never help Israel. We will cut off our diplomatic relation. However, sending our army against Israel in any future probable war needs a thorough study, and at this time, I do not have anything to say on that.
Let me explore a little bit possible future relations with the United States. The Ayatollah has made some remarks about American bases interfering with Iranian independence. He has said that among those who violate human rights, there's no doubt that in the present age this is Carter, referring, I take it, to the president. And I just would like to understand whether he expects friendly or chilly relations with the United States.
If the United States government sees the continuation of the policy that they have had and do not support the Shah, which has committed so much crime and treason to the country and has appointed the illegal government, which the American government is supporting it. So if they seize that one and they start to have better relation with us and have friendly relation with us, then according to our Islamic teaching, there is no reason for us to be in animosity with them.
What is your own role in this government that is to come?
I would not have any position in the future government as such, being the president or a prime minister. And my job is not to be as such. I will be some sort of supervising their activities. I will give them guidance. And if I see some deviation or some mistake, I will remind them how to correct it, give the general guidance.
You would be, in effect, the strong man of Iran.
به این ترتیب شما مرد قوی ایران خواهید بود.
اینطور فرض کنید.
You may assume so.
And that is the first Ayatollah, the Ayatollah Khomeini. And you heard what he had to say, that he is going to be the strong man. I'm not the president. I'm not the prime minister. You can form your government. And you do anything I don't like, I'll let you know. And you can change course. And what do we see here? But images of the Ayatollah carried through the streets, the great leader. Does he speak for them and through them? If he can't see them, is it, or surely can they see him? And he lead them? So they take our embassy and take hostage our diplomats. It is a national nightmare until they are finally released once Reagan takes office. Khomeini insults Saddam Hussein, says he is leading an anti-Islamic state. They see the rise of this Shiite cleric, many of the Shiites in Iraq. And they see a leader that they very much would like. So how does this war begin? We'll watch another little video.
The industrial grade products you need. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Relations between Iran and Iraq worsened when the Ayatollahs took over. The Iraqis claimed that the Iranians were refusing to implement border agreements, and the first skirmishes broke out. In the first big incursion, Iraqi tanks rolled into Zain al-Qaus on September the 7th. 2 days later, they occupied the border village of Saif Saad. On September the 17th, the Iraqi army captured a group of border posts in the south, and then the war began in earnest. At the beginning of last week, Iraqi MiGs bombed 10 Iranian airfields. The next day, the Iranians hit back, and 3 British workers became the first foreign victims of the war. The first major territorial gain came last Wednesday, when Iraq claimed the capture of the town of Qasr Shireen in the north. Qasr Shireen was the first Iranian town of any consequence to fall to the Iraqis, and our visit here today is the first independent confirmation of its fall. The Iraqis say they have no long-term intentions to occupy Qasr Shireen. They'll use it, they say, to force other concessions out of the Iranians. As the Iraqi grip tightens on the town, a few hundred bemused residents adjust to a new and frightening military presence, mainly the old and the infirm who couldn't manage to escape the war. Many thousands left before Qasr Shireen fell, but the Iraqis say that some are trickling back. They come back to a world that's been turned upside down. Before they left, loyalty was expected and demanded by the fanatical revolutionaries who followed the Ayatollah Khomeini. Now, the Islamic Revolution has been replaced by the ruthless Arab socialism of President Saddam Hussein. Destruction in the area was limited to the local Iranian radio and TV station, not destroyed in the fighting, but deliberately demolished afterwards by Iraqi engineers. They blew it up, they say, as a penalty for the anti-Iraq propaganda it had been transmitting across the frontier. A senior tank officer explains Iraq's intention in the sector.
But why we advanced, if you ask me why we advanced to this distance inside Iran? We advanced to this distance to force Iran to recognize that Zain al-Qaus, Saif Saad and Shatt al-Arab is Iraqi according to the laws, according to the rules, according to the international behavior.
But you will be holding on to this Qasr Shireen sector until the Iranians acknowledge that Zain al-Qaus and the others are yours.
That is right. We don't want Qasr Shireen. It is Iranian. We are just coming here to force them to recognize that and to be reasonable enough to see that they cannot do and they cannot have it their way all the time.
Iraq's next major gain was the border town of Mehran, but an Iranian counterattack now puts that in doubt. Then the fighting switched to the vital Shatt al-Arab in the south. The Iraqis crossed the waterway and besieged the port of Khorramshahr. They advanced too on Ahwaz, capital of the Iranian oil province of Khuzestan. And in further fighting, the Iraqis are pressing on the communications links from Tehran to the oil fields.
So if we listen to that tank commander, he'd tell us we're only doing this so we can secure that waterway, so we can get our oil out. If we can believe him. But yes, a lot of this is bombings, and not bombings even with bombers. The Iraqis have Russian planes, they have MiGs, because that's who's been supplying the Arab states. What does Iran have? Up until the outbreak of this war, they'd been an ally of the United States. That was the military of the Shah. They have American Tomcats and things like that. So it's an exchange of bombings, really, by fighter jets. So back and forth, they'll bomb each other with really sort of light payloads, not big heavy bombs like we're used to from American bombers. But the Russians have also been supplying Scud missiles. These are ballistic missiles that are fired from the backs of trucks. Now, this makes them particularly difficult to track. If a missile's fired from a fixed launcher, you can sort of know what its range is and sort of track it. But if it's traveling on the back of a truck in the middle of a barren desert and is fired, you don't know when and where it's going to be fired from, and you have very little time to begin tracking it before it hits its target. That made these quite terrifying. Not enough time to begin tracking it before you know where it's going to land, so that civilians couldn't begin to be evacuated in time. So these Scud missiles used by both sides were terrifying weapons. So you can see from Iraq, they could hit a very wide range. And in fact, during the Gulf War, they were firing them into Israel. They're going to use chemical and biological weapons. Ali Hassan al-Majid, shortened to Chemical Ali, is the head of their chemical weapons production. And they're going to use them right on that border where most of this skirmishing is going on, and they're also going to use them against their own people. So you're going to see chemical weapons used against the Iranians. You're also going to see it used against the Kurds, who during this war are going to be in rebellion against the government centered in Baghdad. And many of the Shiites here feel a great deal of empathy for their fellow Shiites in Iran. I don't like having to show you dead children, but these are Kurdish children that were gassed by Saddam Hussein and his regime based out of central Iraq. What's the U.S. doing during this war? We're going to play both sides. We're going to side with Iraq as an attempt to oust the Iranian regime. If Iraq can defeat them militarily, that means that Khomeini and the Ayatollahs might fall, and we could put another ally in position in Iran. So we're going to share intelligence and arms and all sorts of things with Iraq. On the other hand, Iran has all of these American made weapon systems and planes. Well, you've got to get the right bullets and the right missiles to reload those and resupply them. You understand? You can only get them from us. So we are going to make a covert deal. If you remember Iran Contra, Oliver North is going to make a deal to send money and arms to Iran, and Iran then will tell their proxies in Lebanon to free some hostages. Do you remember that? And then we sent some of that money to the Contra rebels in Central America. It almost cost Reagan his presidency, but instead they sent about 5 of his aides to jail. We'll take Iraq off of their nation supporting terrorism, give them a credit line, direct CIA link, sell them some jetliners. Do you remember when we shot down an Iranian passage liner in the Persian Gulf? I do. We ended up having to pay Iran millions of dollars in damages. I think it took about 10 years in the world court, yeah. A lot of Arab states like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait are going to fund Iraq because of their fear of Iran and their Shiite fundamentalism. They will say, the Iranians will say that a monarchy is illegitimate and un-Islamic. So all of those monarchies over there are now in opposition to Iran. What is Basij? The Ayatollah, in his propaganda campaigns, especially in schools, will target young men ages 6 to 16, and he will ask them to volunteer for the military during this war. He will give them little plastic keys, gold in color, and tell them that this is a key to heaven. That if you martyr yourself in this great struggle against Iraq, that you are guaranteed entry into heaven. And the way they use these young soldiers is to send them out in huge human waves, often over minefields to clear the way, to get gunned down in big waves. Tens of thousands of young Iranian men will die in these human wave attacks trying to clear the way in this futile war. Hundreds of thousands of people will die on both sides. Perhaps 1 million disabled. It's going to crush both sides economically. A UN resolution will help put a ceasefire into effect. No country won. Both countries just suffer tremendously. But coming out of this, Saddam Hussein is convinced that he is an ally of the West, that the West has backed him, given him credit, given him intelligence, sold him arms, and even though he's used chemical weapons, killed his own people, he believes that if he tries to rebuild his country by invading Kuwait, a small, defenseless, unmilitarized state to his south, he'll solve all his problems. Not only will he have this huge coastline, even though Kuwait is quite small, it has big oil reserves under it. So he believes, I'll solve all my problems. I'll invade Kuwait, take it over, annex it into Iraq, and I'm fine. Solve my problems, make a lot of money. What he didn't count on was that the West would not go along with this. He didn't even ask. So when the United States and all of her allies pushed him out, he seemed a bit confused. What happened? I thought we were friends. Well, it turns out only if you're doing exactly what we want and fighting Iran. But you're not allowed to do what we don't want you to do. So, coming out of this, we see permanent U.S. bases in Saudi Arabia and other parts of the Middle East. Why? Because we're going to, oh, well, I guess it's for another lecture, put no fly zones in place over northern Iraq and southern Iraq. What's that mean? It means the United States is going to keep airplanes based here to patrol northern and southern Iraq to keep Saddam Hussein and his forces from bombing or launching chemical weapons against the Shiites in the south or the Kurds in the north. It's to sort of contain Saddam Hussein. So we're going to commit to keeping military bases here for the long term. So not only is Iraq defeated, now they've been hamstrung. And Saddam Hussein is incensed by this. This is how he is now treated after 10 years of being given anything that he wanted. And Osama bin Laden is incensed that Americans will permanently be stationed in the land that contains Mecca and Medina. I guess that's a good place to stop. When we come back, we will continue. I guess I've talked for a long time. All right. Thank you all very much.